And an unending cycle of blame, the team constantly failed. No one took ownership, assumed responsibility, or adopted a winning attitude. What did the new boat crew leader do differently? Asked another of the department heads. When the leader of boat crew 2 took charge of boat crew 6, he exhibited extreme ownership of the force, I explained. He faced the facts. He recognized and accepted that boat crew 6's performance was terrible, that they were losing. He didn't blame anyone, nor did he make excuses for their poor performance. He didn't wait for others to solve the boat crew's problems. His realistic assessment, acknowledgement of failure, and ownership of the problem were key to developing a plan to improve performance and ultimately win. Most important of all, he believed winning was possible. In a boat crew where winning seemed so far beyond reach, the belief that the team actually could win was essential. I continued. The new leader of boat crew 6 focused his team on the mission. Rather than tolerating the bickering, he pulled the team together, focused their collective efforts on a specific goal to win the race. He established a higher standard of performance and accepted nothing less. Why do you think boat crew 2, which had lost its power, continued to perform well even with a far less capable leader from boat crew 6 as another problem? Extreme ownership, leadership is continuous answer. Boat crew 2's leader and silver culture of extreme ownership. In every individual. Boat crew 2 had developed a solid team of high-performing individuals. Each member demanded the highest performance from the others. Repetitive, exceptional performance became a habit. Each individual knew what they needed to do to win and did it. They no longer needed explicit direction from the leader. As a result, boat crew 2 continued to outperform their superior boat crew and vie with boat crew 6 for first place in nearly every race. The detailed how the original leader of boat crew 6 joined boat crew 2, thinking life would be easy for him. Instead, he had a series of step up his game to keep others from the high-performance team. For him, the greatest lesson of that day came. He witnessed a complete turnaround in the performance of his former team as he watched the new leader demonstrate that what seemed impossible was achievable through good leadership. Though he had failed to lead effectively to that point, the original leader of boat crew 6 learned and implemented. He graduated from boat training and had a successful career in SEAL teams. In summary, I told him, whoever my teams and teams of force is all extreme ownership is a concept to help you make the right decisions. The chief technology officer said, we are making the right decisions, he said. Surprising his statement, I responded, you've all admitted that as a company you aren't winning. We may not be winning, said the CTO resolutely, but we're making the right decisions. If you aren't winning, I responded, then you aren't making the right decisions. The CTO was so sure he was right, so content to make excuses and shift blame for his own mistakes and failures that he made ludicrous claims to avoid taking any ownership or responsibility. Just like the original boat crew leader in boat crew 6, this CTO exhibited the opposite of extreme ownership. He took no meaningful action to improve his performance or push his team to improve. Worse, he refused to admit that his own performance was somewhat wrong and that he was taking the lead. His CEO stated plainly that his performance must improve substantially. But the CTO was stuck in a cycle of blaming others and refused to take ownership and responsibility. standards, it's not what you preach, it's what you tolerate. You have to drive your CTO to exercise extreme ownership, to acknowledge mistakes, stop blaming others, and lead his team to success. If you allow the status quo to persist, you can't expect to improve performance. You can't expect to win. A week later, I followed up with a phone call to the CEO to see how he was doing. Some folks are wasting his time on extreme ownership and simply, but the chief technology officer continues to grow. The CEO related how online approach the CTO largely depends and warned that the concept of extreme ownership had many repercussions. This is laughable. There are no repercussions of ownership. There are two types of leaders, effective leaders that lead successful high-performance teams and extreme ownership. Anything else is the way. Anything else is bad leadership. The CTO's performance of his team is technical. His effective as a top team and other departments in a company that had difficult work. The CEO understood his company wasn't winning. They cared too much about the company he built and a lot of those other teams. They must be better. He let the CTO do it. A new CTO came aboard with a different attitude and extreme ownership. This changed the leadership of the company's technology team. Other departments were working together for success, and that team work played a key role as the company rebounded. Once failing and struggling to survive, the company was now back on the path toward profitability and growth. The success illustrated once again that leadership is the most important thing about it. It is the single greatest factor in whether a team succeeds or fails. A leader must find a way to become effective, drive high performance within his or her team in order to win. There are two terms in contact with disciplinary teams. There are no bad teams, only bad leaders. Shark base, camera in Iraq. Question. This makes no sense at all, I thought, as I read through the mission statement from higher command. We were to execute missions by Iraqi security forces. I had the first week to work almost exclusively with the suit. Operations. So it has been found in this was asked to prove that exceptional work training for so rather than to responsibilities. Control of the darkness. This was controlled for training for basic central training cycle. That work consisted of training the team. We designated maritime environments, vehicles, boats, planes, helicopters. We fired thousands of rounds through our conventional weapons until we could do so with the highest degree of accuracy, all systems. Iteration of communication, after drill, not just as a group of individuals, but as a team. A synchronized machine, delivering with precision and efficiency in the challenges of chaotic environments. As SEALs, we kept ourselves in peak physical condition so that we could execute tough missions and meet the extreme physical conditions. Landing miles, lifting heavy weights, swam long distances in the open ocean, all to prepare for combat. We were in the gym physically pushing ourselves through punishing high-intensity workouts. If there was no gym at our training location, we'd be out on the road for a hard run, in the parking lot dragging or flipping heavy tires, or on the mats in fierce grappling and jiu-jitsu contests. Whatever we could do to stay strong and conditioned. Each man was expected to maintain that high level of physical condition so that he could pull his weight and never falter on an operation. We had to be ready to carry wounded combat and full heavy combat gear to safety across rugged terrain. As a critical part of our culture, we constantly challenge each other to test some physical strength. We also had some of the best gear in the world. Encrypted radios, night vision goggles, infrared lasers, lights and markers, uniform Kevlar vests and helmets. In the hands of operators who knew how to use this gear, the tactical advantage over the enemy was huge. Now I was being told the tasking bruiser, my friends, my brothers, these highly trained and motivated men would have to fight alongside conventional Iraqi army soldiers, arguably some of the worst combat troops in the world. Most Iraqi soldiers were poor, uneducated, untrained, undernourished, and unmotivated. With dire economic conditions across Iraq, many simply joined for a paycheck. When the going got tough, they often deserted, as we later witnessed. All of the soldiers had, to their credit, risked their lives to be part of Iraq. Often their families were targeted by terrorists, and their lives threatened while the soldiers were part of history. There were some that were and capable Iraqi soldiers were the rare exception, not the rule. The vast majority of soldiers in the Iraqi army, as fighting men, were far below the standard expected of anyone, and certainly far below what was needed to take on and defeat Iraq's growing insurgency. After 2003, the U.S.-led Coalition Provisional Authority disbanded Saddam Hussein's Iraqi army completely. It then had to be rebuilt from the ground up. The new Iraqi army's training was disorganized, ad hoc, and scattered at best. Some Iraqi soldiers had almost no training. Officers often bribed or bought their way into their rank. Young, enlisted Iraqi soldiers
not victory. Physically, they were weak. Most Iraqi soldiers were incapable of doing even a few push-ups or jumping jacks. Tactically, they were dangerous and unsound, regularly violating basic safety procedures. Worse, some of the Iraqi soldiers had questionable loyalty to the coalition and to the new government of Iraq. Some Sunni soldiers remained loyal to Saddam, but most Iraqi soldiers were Shiites, and many of these saw Muqtada al-Sadr, the fiery cleric hostile to Americans and closely allied with Iran, as a national hero. Every so often, reports surfaced of Iraqi soldiers who turned their weapons on their Army or Marine Corps advisors. With that knowledge, how could trust be built? In addition to poor training, the Iraqi soldiers were barely equipped for a camping trip, much less combat operations. Some wore sneakers or sandals. Their uniforms were a mix and match collection of military clothing in American, Soviet, or Middle Eastern camouflage. The variety of clothing made it hard to distinguish from each other, especially in an environment where the enemy also wore paramilitary uniforms and gear. Iraqi soldiers' web gear, or load-bearing equipment, consisted of tattered canvas Soviet-era chest rigs with AK-47 magazine pouches that often fell apart. The weapons they carried were a mix of rifles confiscated from insurgents, many of them poorly made Iraqi or Chinese copies of the AK-47. Most were in poor shape and far below the standards of the original Russian design. They were non-conventional weapons rusted to the point where the sights could not be adjusted. Their technology generally stopped at their weapon. They had no night vision goggles, no lasers. In fact, very few had a simple flashlight. Their body was ancient, with questionable effectiveness. Ashton and Bruce was charged with getting our Iraqi soldiers equipped, organized, and most importantly, training the right soldiers increasingly effective as possible areas of Iraq. This meant building training programs on secure bases, running Iraqi soldiers through basic soldiering skills and finding some advanced infantry tactics before taking out on patrol in enemy territory. But this was the body, the epicenter of the insurgency, and a decisive battle for our independence. It was fighting to be done, most to protect, and enemy fighters to capture. To pull Iraqi soldiers from the battlefield for training beyond a day or two was simply impossible. Our mission as SEALs is to go into hostile territory with ragtag Iraqi soldiers and fight against hardcore insurgent mujahideen fighters to try to kill as many of us as they could. SEALs are known for running the sound of the guns, but running to the sound of the guns is much easier when a SEAL is surrounded by other SEALs. When we know the man covering our SEALs or backside is someone who has been through the same training, has the same gear, and speaks the same language, someone we can trust. For a SEAL to put his life in the hands of someone he doesn't know, a person who's not well trained, undisciplined, speaks that language, and whose trustworthiness is doubtful, is asking a hell of a lot. And SEAL teams, the bond of our brotherhood is our strongest weapon. If you take that away from us, we lose trust with all of us. When our SEAls asked me to learn that they would be allowed to conduct combat operations only alongside Iraqi soldiers, they were limited and completely against the enemy. We knew that the dangers in our body from the enemy were already extremely high. There was no need to increase the risk to our force. Yet that is exactly what we were being directed to do. Even my initial reaction was, hell no. It just wasn't worth it. Why would we go into combat without every possible advantage, much less a self-inflicted distinct disadvantage? I didn't believe that the mission made sense. I didn't believe it was smart. I didn't believe it would be successful. To imagine a firefight alongside Iraqi soldiers with such inferior training and questionable loyalty seemed outrageous, perhaps even suicidal. But as task unit Bruiser's commander, I knew my actions and mindset carried great weight among my troops. These were my orders, and for me to lead, I had to believe. So I kept my doubts to myself as I asked a simple question: why? Why would the U.S. military leadership on the ground in Iraq and back in America, from Baghdad to the Pentagon to the White House, task Navy SEALs, other special operations, and U.S. Army and Marine Corps units do such a high-risk mission? I didn't combat to do for the best people by my side. Why make it harder? I knew I had to adjust my perspective, to mentally step back from the enemy fight just outside the wire and think about this question from a strategic level, as if I were one of those generals in Baghdad or back in Iraq. Sure, they were far from the front lines, but certainly they had the same goal we did, to win. That led to another question: what was winning? It certainly wasn't winning in a traditional military sense of the word. There would be no surrender from this enemy we fought against. There would be no peace to return. Winning here meant only that Iraq would become a relatively secure and stable country. So I asked myself, how can you prepare the Iraqi soldiers to handle security in their own country? They needed to start somewhere. If there wasn't time to train Iraqi soldiers off the battlefield in a secure environment on base, then they would have to learn by doing, through OJT, on-the-job training. If the Iraqis never reached a level of skill at which they could defend their country from terrorist insurgents, then who would defend it? The answer was all too clear: us, the U.S. military. We would be stuck here securing their country for them for generations. The disparity between the capability of poorly trained, ill-equipped, and unmotivated Iraqi soldiers and that of the determined, well-equipped, and highly effective insurgent fighters they were up against was gigantic. Virtually every time an American outpost in Ramadi was handed over to the control of Iraqi soldiers, insurgents attacked and overran their position, killing dozens of Iraqi troops, and sometimes the U.S. Marine or Army advisors assigned to them. The Iraqi soldiers were no match for the insurgents. It would take generations of training to get the Iraqi soldiers to the level needed to overcome and defeat such an aggressive enemy. Rather than them, such lackluster soldiers would likely never be capable of fighting and defeating a serious adversary. For those of us on the front lines of this conflict, it was clear that many senior U.S. military officers who, far removed from direct interaction with Iraqi soldiers, did not understand the Iraqi army's true lack of capability. They were simply terrible, and no amount of training would make them excellent sailors. But perhaps we could make them good enough. As I thought about this, I realized it was something that we, national group and U.S. and coalition forces, could do. These Iraqi troops, or Germans as they call themselves in Iraq, may never be good enough to take on a well-equipped and determined enemy, but they could be good enough to handle a less substantial enemy. We can ensure the current state of things by reducing the insurgency of the region. In addition to building Iraqi forces to training, combat advisement, and battlefield, we, our SEALs and U.S. forces, would have to crush the insurgency and lower its capability to the point where Iraqi soldiers and police would at least have a chance to maintain a relative peace by themselves, a chance to make. In order to do that, our task and cruiser SEAls need to get outside the wire, on the battlefield, and inflict serious damage on insurgent fighters. But we couldn't operate unless our mission received approval for a change. The SEAL task force that had been remodeled months prior to our arrival had told us they had a number of combat operations that consisted of only SEALs without Iraqis. Almost all of those operations had been denied. In order to receive that approval, we must take Iraqi soldiers with us on every operation. They were a ticket to leave the base, push into enemy territory, and unleash fury upon the insurgents. With that, I understood I had to leave. Now I had to ensure that my troops understood the lead. I called for a meeting and pulled all the SEAL operation task conclusion together into the briefing plan. All right, fellas, I said, you've heard the rumors. Every operation we conduct will include Iraqi soldiers. There were mutterings of obscenities and loud exhales of disgust. I repeat, every mission we undertake, we will fight alongside the Germans. The room cut loose again, this time with louder disagreement and curses. The consensus from our SEALs, the frontline troops who would execute our missions, was clear. This is marriage. I cut the not-so-subtle protest short. I understand. The battlefield here in Ramadi is dangerous. It's difficult. Why make it even harder by forcing us to fight alongside Iraqi soldiers? Not much of an agreement. Well, let me ask you something. If the Iraqi military can't get to a point where they can handle security in their own country, who's going to do it? The room fell silent. I drove home the point by restating the question. I say again, if the Iraqi military can't handle the security in this country, who is going to do it? I had their attention, and they knew the answer. But to ensure everyone clearly understood the strategic importance of why we were being directed to do this, I made it perfectly clear. If Iraqi soldiers can't do it, us. If we don't get these guys up to speed, we will have this mission next year, a year after, and a year after. The infrastructure will be stuck with our generations. It will be up to our sons and our sons' sons to figure it out. I can say that, although we stay as if we had working with Iraqi soldiers, they will begin to see this mission from a strategic point. I continue. Like him, I understand that no matter how much we train them, we will never completely achieve the standards that we set for ourselves. But we will help them get better. And there's something else we can do to help them. We will close with and destroy the enemy on the streets of Ramadi to reduce the insurgents' military capability and lower the level of violence. When the enemy is beat, the Iraqi army can take over security units for themselves. I saw some hands nodding. We have to get each mission, each operation approved. And if we want our missions approved, we must have Iraqi soldiers with us on every operation. Does anyone not understand this? The room was quiet. Everyone understood. They didn't have to jump for joy at the thought of fighting alongside Iraqi soldiers on a dangerous battlefield. But they did have to understand why they were doing it, so that they could believe in the mission. Afterward, I spoke to my team leaders in greater detail about why this mission was important. Unlike the previous SEAL task unit, I told my officers and chiefs they were not to submit any concept of operations or CONOPS, a document that lays out the basic idea of an operation for approval by higher headquarters, without Iraqi soldiers as part of our force. What about all the unilateral operations you did on your last deployment? They asked me. Didn't they make a difference? The other platoon commander and both platoon chiefs waited for my response. Yes, we did a whole lot of unilateral direct action missions in Iraq 2 years ago, I answered. And since that time, coalition forces across Iraq have continued. But here are the facts. In the last 2 years, enemy attacks are up 300%. 300%. This place is on a downward spiral. We've got to do something different if we want to win. Every one of your operations will have Iraqi soldiers, I told them. These Iraqi soldiers are our means to do something different, our ticket to operate. We will get them up to speed. We will prepare them the best we can. We will fight alongside them, and we will crush the enemy until even the Iraqi army will be able to fight on their own. Any other questions? There were no more questions. The most important question had been answered. Why? Once I analyzed the mission and understood for myself that critical piece of information, I could then believe in the mission. If I didn't believe in it, there's no way I could possibly convince SEALs of my task. If I expressed doubts or openly questioned the wisdom of this plan in front of the troops, their derision toward the mission would increase exponentially. They would never believe it. As a result, they would never commit to it, and it would fail. But once I understood it, I didn't pass that understanding clearly as a signal to my troops so that they believed in themselves. When they understood why, they would commit to the mission, persevere through the inevitable challenges in store, and accomplish the tasks set for them. Most of the operators accepted my explanation. Not every member of Task Unit was convinced immediately. We had reinforced the importance of combat advising Iraqi soldiers continuously. Through the course of the deployment, our SEALs conducted every major operation with Iraqi soldiers. After Iraqi soldiers did things that were stupid or dangerous. In one combat operation, an Iraqi soldier accidentally squeezed the trigger of his AK-47 rifle and blasted a dozen rounds with fully automatic fire to the floor next to the SEAL operator standing near him. The bullets missed some of our SEAls by inches. On another operation, Leif and his SEAL combat advisors had to rip the rifles out of the hands of Iraqi soldiers who, while under fire, ran from the enemy contact while shooting their AK-47s backward over their heads, with other SEALs and Iraqi soldiers downrange from them. Incredibly foolish. Another time, Iraqi soldiers on patrol with our SEALs were engaged by enemy fighters. An Iraqi soldier was hit, and his comrades abandoned him in the street and ran for cover. 2 SEAls had to run through a hailstorm of enemy fire across an open street, what we call a metal water run, to retrieve the wounded Iraqi soldier and drag him to cover while bullets impacted all around them. The Iraqi soldiers frustrated the hell out of our SEAls, who trained and fought alongside them. But they also found them useful in ways we hadn't anticipated. A SEAL breacher might use a sledgehammer or explosive charge to open a gate, an effective method, though extremely loud, which let everyone in the neighborhood know we were there. Our Iraqi soldiers knew how the doors and gates were secured and would quietly pop them open by hand with little effort. They could also tell the bad guys from the good. To our Americans, with unarmed enemy fighters were hiding among the civilian populace, we often couldn't tell the difference. But our Iraqi soldiers could discern dress, mannerisms, and Arabic accents that were different from that of the local populace. Their local and cultural knowledge were advantageous in helping us better understand and identify the enemy. Over the next 6 months, we took Iraqi soldiers right through the thick from the biggest battles for the city of Barbell. Several of them were killed in action, others were wounded. Despite the grumblings from tasking the bruiser, a certain base level of camaraderie formed between our SEALs and their Iraqi counterparts through blood, sweat, and tears in difficult combat operations. Through the success of the the first operation, ready first brigade combat teams seized, clear, hold, build strategy. Enemy fighters were forced out of their former safe havens within the line. Because we included Iraqi soldiers on every operation, our chain of command approved all our plans to push through dangerous enemy territory in support of the strategy. That enabled us to hammer enemy fighters with deadly effect, making those areas a little safer for the U.S. soldiers that built permanent combat outposts and lived and patrolled out of them, forcing the insurgents out of their former strongholds. As a result, the local people ceased to passive support of the insurgents and instead stood sides to support us and Iraqi forces. Over time, the level of violence decreased dramatically, as did the insurgents' military capability. By the end of our deployment, the area was secure enough to enable our Iraqi army units to begin operations under their own command and control, patrolling into the city, engaging the enemy, and capturing or killing insurgents. That portion of the mission was a success like any other. Principle. In order to convince and inspire others to follow and accomplish the mission, a leader must be a true believer in the mission. Even when others doubt and question the amount of risk, asking, is it worth it? The leader must believe in the greater cause. If a leader does not believe, he or she will not take the risks required to overcome the inevitable challenges necessary to win. And they will not be able to convince others, especially the frontline troops, who must execute their mission to do so. Leaders must always operate with the understanding that they are part of something greater than themselves and their own personal interest. They must impart this understanding to their teams down to the level operators on the ground. Far more important than training or equipment, a resolute belief in the mission is critical for any team or organization to win and achieve results. In many cases, a leader must align his thoughts and visions to that of the mission. Once a leader believes in the mission, that belief shines through to those below and above in the chain of command. Actions and words reflect belief with clear confidence and self-assuredness that is not possible when belief is in doubt. The challenge comes when that alignment isn't explicitly clear. When a leader's confidence breaks, those who are supposed to follow him will see this and begin to question their own belief in the mission. Every leader must be able to detach himself from the immediate tactical mission and understand how it fits into strategic goals. When leaders receive an order that they themselves question and do not understand, they must ask the question, why? Why are we being asked to do this? Those leaders must take a step back, deconstruct the situation, analyze the strategic picture, and come to a conclusion. If they cannot determine the satisfactory answer themselves, they must ask questions on the chain of command until they understand why. If frontline leaders and troops understand why, they can move forward, fully believing what they're doing. It is likewise incumbent on senior leaders to take the time to explain and answer the questions of their junior leaders so that they too can understand why they believe. Whether in the ranks of military units or companies or corporations, the frontline troops need to have as clear an understanding of the strategic picture as senior leaders will anticipate. This is all the general understanding of the why to their troops. In any organization, goals must always be in alignment. If goals are aligned at some level, this issue must be addressed and rectified. In business, just as in the military, if someone chooses a course of action or issue an order that will purpose the result, it's not that they operate in certain schools and thus not believe it. Junior leaders must ask questions and also provide feedback on the training. Leaders can fully understand the ramifications and plan to affect execution on the ground. Belief in the mission ties into the fourth law of combat, decentralized command, chapter 8. The leader must explain not just what to do, but why. It is the responsibility of the subordinate leader to reach out and ask if they do not understand. Only when leaders at all levels understand and believe in the mission can they pass that understanding and belief to their teams so that they can persevere through challenges, execute, and win. Application to business. This new compensation plan is terrible, said one of the mid-level managers. It will drive our best salespeople away. The rest of the class agreed. Toward the end of a short leadership development program for the company's mid-level, my discussions with the class have revealed a major issue that created stress and fragmentation among the ranks of the company. Corporate leadership had recently announced a new compensation structure for their sales force. The new plan substantially reduced compensation, especially for low-producing salespeople. What's the issue? I asked the group. It's hard enough to keep salespeople here. This doesn't help, one manager responded. They don't get how hard it is in this market, said another, referring to corporate senior leadership. This new compensation plan will push people to our competitors. Some of my folks have already heard rumors about it. They don't like it at all, and I can't convince them otherwise. I don't believe in it myself, another responded. I asked them all a simple question. Why? Why what? One of the managers responded. Why is your leadership making this change? I asked. Hell if I know, one manager said emphatically, which brought laughs from the group. I smiled and nodded. Then I asked again. Okay, but why do you think they're implementing this plan? Do you think they want to push your best salespeople out the door? Do they want those salespeople to go to your competitors? Do you think they actually want the company to lose money and fail? The room was quiet. The managers, most of whom respected the boss and maintained a relationship with the company's corporate leaders, knew that they were smart, experienced, and committed to the success of the company. The problem was, they don't understand this new plan implemented. Is anyone asking a question here? The room fell silent. Finally, the class clown put it. I'm not asking. I like my job. After looking from the room, I smiled and settled in down. Understandable. So this is she unreasonable? Would she actually fire someone for asking a question? The group of managers mumbled, no. What is it then? I asked. Finally, one of the most senior managers spoke up with a serious answer. I feel pretty stupid. Our CEO is smart and has a lot of experience. She gets this business. Okay, I shot back. So then you're all just scared to look stupid. Heads nodded and yes. I nodded as well. Now I'm more fully understanding the issue. No one wants to look stupid, especially in front of us. Let me ask you this, I continued. When you can't explain the reason behind this new compensation plan to your sales force, how does that make you look? Stupid and scared, the class clown responded. Exactly, I shot back in jest. When you were simple, easy way to solve the problem for everybody. That afternoon, I sat at the CEO's office. She came in at the company's president chance. How's the workshop going? The CEO inquired. It's going pretty well, I said. We have a solid crew of managers. Absolutely. They're a great group, replied the CEO. How's your relationship with them? Oh, I think it's very strong with most of them. Some of the newer ones I don't know all that well yet, but as a whole, I have a good relationship with our managers, the CEO answered. Do they ever confront you or anything or ask questions? I asked. The CEO thought for a few seconds. Not really. I think they get the business, and I think they know what we were trying to do. So it really isn't much that they would need to confront me on. I've been in this game a long time. I wouldn't be here today if I didn't know what was going on. They know that, and I think they respect that. Experience counts a lot in this business. I think if they had an issue, they would certainly bring it up to me. Common misperception among military leaders or corporate senior executives. This was an example of a boss who didn't fully comprehend the lead of her position. In her mind, she was fairly laid back, open to questions, comments, and suggestions from people. She talked about maintaining an open world policy. But in the minds of her sales managers, she was still the boss, experienced, smart, and most important, powerful. That position demanded a high level of reverence. So high, in fact, that for an employee to question her ideas seemed disrespectful. None of them were comfortable questioning her, even though none of the mid-level managers actually worried about losing their jobs because they had asked the question. But they were certainly worried about looking bad in front of the boss. I'm not sure they are as comfortable confronting you or opening up to you as you think, I stated boldly. Really? The CEO asked with a slightly puzzled face. Let me give you an example that came up today, I replied. The new sales compensation plan. What about it? Don't they like it? The CEO asked with surprise. It's not that they don't like it, I answered. I don't think they get it. They don't get it. The plan isn't really that complex. In fact, it's simple, said the CEO, preparing to give me a quick explanation. It's not that they don't get what the plan is. You're right, it's simple. It reduces overall compensation for sales staff, especially for low producers. Exactly. What's the issue with that, the CEO said. She was right. I'm without experience in this particular field. I have no trouble understanding the basic concept of this new compensation plan. The issue is not that they don't understand the plan, but that they don't understand why the plan is being implemented. They don't believe it. They think they're going to drive the new sales plan. We look forward to refine their compensation plans and more benefits. The CEO now got a little offensive. Then they clearly don't understand what I'm doing with the business, she stated. When we cut compensation, especially for increasing salespeople, that savings reduces cost. When I reduce cost for the salespeople, it reduces our overhead. With our overhead reduced, I can lower the price of our products. That will allow our bigger producers to bring in even more business. Sure, the new compensation plan is targeted toward our bottom people, but those bottom people really don't move the needle in our business. If something new, they won't have to go. In fact, it allows some of our better producers to expand into those accounts and increase sales. So there's an opportunity for our sales force to do even better. That makes a lot of sense, I replied. It absolutely does, said the CEO. She explained how she had made this move before in a tough market. It almost always helps. It might reduce the overall size of our sales force, but it will increase our volume in the long run. A smaller, more effective sales force also reduces overhead. With lower healthcare costs, fewer desks, fewer computers to buy, greater efficiency, it's a win-win. That sounds good. There's only one problem with it, I said. What's that? Said the CEO. Managers don't understand what it means. They don't understand why. And so they don't believe in the strategy. If they don't believe, neither will their sales force. If this plan rolls out and don't execute it, don't believe in it, your plan is far from your thing. So what can I do to make them believe? Asked the CEO. It's easy, I explained. Just tell them. The CEO finally understood what she needed to do. For my training with the mid-level managers the next day, the CEO made an appearance and kicked things off with a short presentation. Good morning, everyone, she began. It pointed out to me that you all had some issues with the compensation. What can we like? After a few moments of silence, one of the more senior managers finally mustered the courage to speak up. Cutting into our sales team's take-home pay raise, said the manager. It may drive someone else crazy, and that could hurt us in the long run. The CEO smiled. She explained the details of the strategy behind it, the increased volume, the reduced overhead, the greater capture of existing accounts being handled by higher producing salespeople. The managers quickly saw the connection and understood the benefits of the plan. Does anyone have any questions? The CEO finished. No one spoke up. Seriously, does anyone have any questions? Don't be afraid to ask. I obviously didn't make this clear to you. And unfortunately, none of you asked, she jabbed. No, I think we get it now, one of the managers replied. Do you think you can explain it to your sales force in a manner that they will understand? Asked the CEO. I do, a manager answered. But I still think some of the low producers will be upset. I'm sure some of them will be, the CEO replied. As I said, that's part of the strategy here. The ones I want you to focus on here are the big producers and those that you think have the potential to become big producers. I've done this before. We will get results. Anyone else have anything? The room now loosened up by the straight shooting conversation with the CEO, relaxed and broken into some small talk before the CEO went on her way. The class continued. What do you think? I asked the class. That is exactly what I needed, said one manager. Now I get it, remarked another. I wish we would have known that all along, the third manager stated. Let me ask you another question. Who is to blame for the CEO not explaining this to you in more detail? I asked. The managers in the room remained silent. They knew the answer and nodded as they acknowledged the topic that I had covered in detail earlier. That's right, I said. You. That's what extreme ownership is all about. If you don't understand or believe in the decisions coming down from your leadership, it is up to you to ask questions until you understand how and why those decisions are being made. Not knowing why prohibits you from believing in it. When you are in a leadership position, that is a recipe for failure, and it is unacceptable. As a leader, you must believe. But the boss should have explained this to us, right? One manager asked. Absolutely. I explained that to her. And sure enough, she came down here and did just that. But she's not a mind reader. The CEO can't predict what you won't get or understand. She's not perfect. None of us are. Things are going to slip through the cracks from time to time. It happens. I made all kinds of mistakes when I led sales. Often, my subordinate leadership would pick up the slack. I think they were infringing on my leadership trait. On the contrary, I would thank them for covering me. Leadership isn't one person leading a team. It's a group of leaders working together up and down the chain of command to lead. If you are on your own, I don't care how good you are, you won't be able to handle it. So we let the boss down when we didn't ask questions and communicate with her, said one of the quieter managers in the back of the room. Yes, you did, I confirmed. People talk about leadership requiring courage. This is exactly one of those situations. It takes courage to go to the CEO's office, knock on the door, and understand the strategy behind your decisions. You might feel stupid, but you will feel far worse trying to explain to your team a mission or strategy that you don't understand or believe in yourself. And, as you pointed out, you are letting the boss down because she will never know that her guidance is not being promulgated properly through the ranks. If you don't ask questions so you can understand and believe the mission, you are failing as a leader and you are failing the team. So if you ever get a task or guidance or a mission that you don't believe in, don't just sit back and accept it. Ask questions until you understand why, so you can believe what you're doing and you can pass that information down the chain to your team with confidence so that they can get out and execute the mission. That is leadership. Chapter 4. Check the ego. Jocko Willink. Camp Caribbean, Ramadi, Iraq. Welcome to Ramadi. Enemy tracer rounds were zipping overhead as I raced up the stairs to the third-story rooftop of our tactical operations center. Our camp was under attack. I hadn't even had time to fasten my body armor. When the shooting started, I grabbed my helmet and rifle, swung my load-bearing equipment over my shoulders, and headed for the roof. SEALs were arriving by the dozen, standing in flip-flops with only shorts and t-shirts under their body armor, but helmet on and weapons at the ready. Just across the river, in the darkness, enemy fighters had unleashed heavy volleys of machine gun fire on two separate U.S. outposts, and the American soldiers were returning fire with a vengeance. The bright glow of tracer fire was evident in both directions. Another group of enemy fighters had engaged on camp, and were hammering our target with gunfire from the far bank of the Euphrates River. But they hadn't counted on a response. Within minutes, every Navy SEAL in tasking the cruiser and several of our non-SEAL support personnel were on the rooftop shooting back. Some SEALs had brought their M4 rifles, other M79 40mm grenade launchers, others their Mark 48 and Mark 46 double-fed machine guns. We unleashed incredible volumes of fire back at the enemy fighters' muzzle flashes. I directed an M79 gunner to pick some 40mm ammunition rounds up so we could identify the targets. Wade was on the rooftop next to me, shooting. The SEAL just behind him unloaded two full 100-round belts to his machine gun, spewing spent shell casings across the rooftop that bounced with a metallic clunk. Everybody was shooting, having a hell of a time. There was much laughter as guys unloaded what was clearly a amount of gunfire again. Soon, the enemy fighters were either dead or retreating, and their attacks were starting. The SEAL machine gunners were on this front. This is my third deployment exposure, said the SEAL machine gunner excitedly. And that's the first time I've fired a machine gun in combat. It was his first day on the ground. A few of us have been here for a week, including Leif, some of the other 3 leaders, and me. But most of the tasking the cruiser SEALs had arrived only that day. As much fun as we had shooting from the rooftop, this is a wake-up call for everyone in tasking the cruiser. This was a total war zone, and the most violent place in Iraq. For those of us who were deployed to Iraq previously, that was a realization that this time would be different and a lot more dangerous. Welcome to Ramadi. Throughout 2005 and 2006, the vast and volatile conflict was the most dangerous place in Iraq, accounting for the majority of U.S. casualties in Operation Iraqi Freedom. Of all the places in Anbar, the city of Ramadi was the most deadly. Located on the Euphrates River, Ramadi, with 400,000 residents, was the capital of Anbar province and the epicenter of the violent Sunni insurgency. The city was strewn with rubble-piled buildings, burned out hulks of twisted metal that had once been vehicles, and walls marred by bullet holes. Giant bomb craters from improvised explosive devices, or IEDs, dotted the main roads through town. Thousands of heavy-armed Sunni insurgent fighters loyal to Al-Qaeda in Iraq controlled some 2/3 of the geographic area of the city. U.S. forces couldn't even begin to penetrate these areas without sustaining massive casualties. Al-Qaeda in Iraq claimed the city as the capital of their caliphate. Valiant U.S. Army soldiers and Marines ran convoys and patrols along the deadly, heavy IED roads. They conducted coordinated search operations into enemy territory and engaged in fierce fighting. Most of the several thousand U.S. troops in Ramadi were located on large secure bases outside the city itself. But along the main road through the city, a string of isolated U.S. Marine and Army outposts were constantly under attack. The level of determination and sophistication from the insurgent fighters in Ramadi was far beyond the U.S. and Caspian cruisers and previous opponents. Several times a week, groups of 20 or 50 well-armed enemy fighters launched malicious attacks on U.S. forces. These were well-coordinated, complex attacks executed simultaneously on multiple U.S. outposts, separated by several kilometers. They were hardcore moves. Many enemy attacks followed a similar pattern. Each began with a sudden barrage of accurate, devastating machine gun fire in multiple directions, which hammered the American sentry posts and forced those on guard to take cover. Then, while soldiers or Marines were hunkered down, deadly RPG-7 shoulder-fired rockets were launched in rapid succession, impacting the violent noise with lethal shrapnel. Next, mortars, fired from some distance away, rained down inside the walls of the coalition compound, often impacting with alarming accuracy. All of this was done in an effort to take out the sentries, or force them to keep their heads down long enough so they couldn't return fire, while the enemy launched their final and most devastating weapon, the VVIED suicide bomber, driving a large truck or vehicle filled with several thousand pounds of explosives. If the truck made it past the concrete barriers, past the sentries, and inside the compound, the results would be catastrophic. As deadly as the most powerful U.S. Tomahawk missile launched from a Navy warship, or Joint Direct Attack Mission, JDAM, guided bomb dropped from U.S. aircraft. These enemy attacks were well coordinated and viciously executed. Jihadi militants were far more capable than those I had previously seen in Iraq 2 years before, and eager to wipe out American outposts, leaving dozens of Marines or soldiers dead and many more wounded. But those fearless Marine and Army sentries held their ground every time and beat the insurgents back. Instead of taking cover to save themselves, the young Marines and soldiers who manned the watchtowers and sentry posts courageously stood fast and returned fire with deadly accurate machine gun fire of their own. Their selfless stands almost always prevented the vehicle-borne IEDs from entering all the way into the compound. The vehicle-borne IED might explode in a massive fireball and concussion, but the enemy could not get close enough to U.S. forces, protected behind sandbags and concrete barriers. The Marines and soldiers fought off those attacks with such frequency that they almost became commonplace. Just another day of Ramadi. In tasking the cruiser, we were confident by instilling culture within our task unit to never be satisfied. We pushed ourselves harder to continuously improve our performance. We knew our troops that we couldn't take the enemy for granted, that we could never be complacent. With all that in mind, the boys in tasking the cruiser were fired up and eager to prove themselves as we deployed to Ramadi in the spring of 2006. Immediately upon arrival, we were humbled by the violence of the battlefield and the incredible heroism of the conventional U.S. soldiers and Marines of the 2nd Brigade Combat Team, 28th Infantry Division. This had a team with much more advanced training and all the finest weapons, lasers, optics, and gadgetry that the enormous Special Operations Command budget could buy. But we were in awe of the soldiers and Marines who manned the outposts in enemy territory and were daily locked in a deadly struggle against a fierce and determined enemy. When the 1st Armored Division's Ready 1st Brigade Combat Team arrived to replace the 2nd Brigade Combat Team, 28th Infantry Division, a month into our deployment, again we developed a deep respect and admiration for these brothers in arms, and were proud to serve alongside them. Every one of the conventional units we work with had seen extensive combat, all U.S. troops had suffered many more wounded. These soldiers and Marines were the real deal. They utilized the term warrior. The enemy was also strong and incredibly capable. They were deadly and efficient, watching, analyzing, and looking for weaknesses to exploit. If U.S. forces were defending their mind, I saw right away that all of us, conventional Army and Marine units and Special Operation units like our SEALs and tasking the cruiser, had to work together to support each other. Unfortunately, there were a small number of U.S. Special Operations units, including some SEALs, who view themselves as a cut above regular U.S. Army soldiers and Marines, and would only operate independently. That cockiness produced some conventional Army and Marine commanders who didn't like Special Operations units. But if U.S. forces were to win this difficult fight here in Ramadi, we would all need to check our egos and work together. From our earliest arrival, We established the precedent that Team Bruiser would treat our Army and Marine brothers and sisters in arms with nothing but the highest professional respect and courtesy. SEAL units are sometimes known for long hair and sloppy uniforms, but to conventional units, appearance was a measure of professionalism. In Task Unit Bruiser, I insisted that our uniforms be squared away and our haircuts military regulation. We sought ways to work together with these units to support one another. The goal was simple: secure and stabilize the body. With this attitude of humility and mutual respect, we forged strong relationships with the Army and Marine battalions and companies that owned the battle space in and around the body. We took great risks to patrol deep into enemy territory, to provide sniper support and protect friendly troops in the streets. Those soldiers and Marines, in turn, constantly put their troops at risk to come help us with heavy fire support, M1A2 Abrams tanks, and M2 Bradley fighting vehicles, and casualty evacuations when needed. After a month on the ground in Ramadi, Task Unit Bruiser began. We figured out how to position ourselves on the high ground, where we could do the most damage to enemy fighters and best support U.S. Army and Marine units operating in the city. When the enemy rallied to attack, SEAL snipers sprung into action and engaged with precision sniper fire, killing large numbers of well-armed Moose fighters and routing their attacks. As enemy activity escalated, so did SEAL aggression. Once our SEAL elements were discovered, our positions transitioned from clandestine sniper hide sites into fortified fighting positions. SEAL machine gunners joined the fight, hammering
Sabini, it's because my hair is so long, because we can't get haircuts in the UK.
40mm high explosive grenades and launched our own shoulder-fired rockets at the enemy. Rapidly, the number of enemy fighters killed at the hands of Task Unit Bruiser SEALs grew to unprecedented levels. Every bad guy killed meant more U.S. soldiers, Marines, and SEALs survived another day. They were one day closer to returning home safely to their families. Every enemy fighter killed also meant another Iraqi soldier, policeman, or government official survived. And more Iraqi civilians lived in a little less fear of Al-Qaeda and their insurgent allies. We fought an evil enemy, perhaps as evil as any the U.S. military has faced in its long history. These violent jihadists used torture, rape, and murder as weapons to ruthlessly terrorize, intimidate, and rule over the civilian populace who lived in abject fear. The American public and much of the Western world lived in willful naivete of the barbaric, unspeakable tactics these jihadis employed. It was subhuman savagery. Having witnessed this repeatedly, in our minds, and those of the people who suffered under their brutal reign, the Moose deserve no mercy. For our relatively small group of about 36 SEALs, the number of enemy fighters killed on a daily basis drew attention from the operational officers. As Task Unit Bruiser continued to operate with awesome lethality, some other units across Iraq wanted in on the action in Ramadi. One particular group of advisors from another part of Iraq had similar capability to our SEALs in Ramadi and worked alongside a well-trained Iraqi Army unit. Unlike most Iraqi soldiers, these troops were equipped with good gear, including some of the best rifles, scopes, lasers, night vision goggles, and bombs in Iraq. With the right training and the right equipment, these Iraqi soldiers' skill level and operational capabilities far exceeded any of the other Iraqi Army units we work with in Ramadi. Because of their superior training and high level of visibility with U.S. military brass, this Iraqi unit and their U.S. advisors had a great deal of leeway to operate wherever and however they wanted. When they got wind of the action in Ramadi, they quickly gained approval to move there and get to work. When the new unit arrived, they were sent to Camp Corregidor Forward Operating Base on the eastern side of the city. Camp Corregidor was owned and operated by the U.S. Army 101st Airborne Division's 1st Battalion, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment. The legendary 506, made famous by Stephen Ambrose's book, Band of Brothers, which became an HBO miniseries. The book follows a single company's heroic efforts in the European campaign against Nazi Germany in World War II. These brave men had set a high standard, and the modern-day soldiers of the 1st of the 506th carried on that tradition with pride and added to their historic legacy. The 1st of the 506th Battalion was commanded by a U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel, an extremely smart, charismatic, and professional officer who set the standard for military leaders. He was one of the finest battlefield commanders and honored to serve. The colonel commanded with a subtle intensity that was complemented with a genuinely kind and easygoing attitude. He was incredibly good, and leading men in the violent battles demanded every ounce of leadership possible. Camp Corregidor was combat living defined. Everything was difficult there. A fine, powder-like sand, which U.S. troops called moon dust, killed buildings, equipment, weapons, vehicles, clothing, and skin. But that was the least of the problems. Camp Corregidor bordered on one of the most dangerous areas of Ramadi, called the Malab District. The camp was under constant attack from mortars, machine guns, and rockets. The colonel expected the highest level of discipline from his 1st and 506 soldiers. Slacking here, even when just going to chow off for lunch, there were some horrific things and death. Discipline in such a situation started with the little things: iron-tight haircuts, clean shave every day, and uniforms maintained. With that, the more important things fell into place: body armor and helmets worn outdoors at all times, and weapons clean and ready for use at a moment's notice. Discipline created vigilance and operational readiness, which translated to high performance and success in battle. We sent Task Unit Bruiser SEALs from Delta Platoon to live and work out of Camp Corregidor, to train and combat advise Iraqi soldiers there, and support the 1st and 506 Band of Brothers. When the SEAL element arrived, they humbly took on the same habits as their 1st of the more relaxed grooming setting that SEALs typically enjoy elsewhere. The SEALs at Camp Corregidor keep their hair short, shaved every day, and even don the same combat uniform camouflage as their Army counterparts. This overt sign of camaraderie endeared the SEALs to the soldiers of the 1st and 506. These soldiers had been in a bloody fight for nearly 6 months, and the SEALs treated them with professionalism and respect. The Army returned that respect, and a bond quickly formed between soldiers and SEALs. Our SEALs have been working on Camp Corregidor for several weeks, carrying out dangerous operations with courage, skill, and effectiveness. At first, the SEAL platoon commander was concerned with the arrival of the new, well-trained air active unit and their American advisors. He called me on the field expedient telephone and confided, "This unit that just arrived likely has much better capability than us. They have a lot of experience. Their Iraqi skill level is far above our conventional junkies. They have much better gear and good weapons, and their Iraqis even have a sniper capability." I replied, "That's good. I'm glad there are Iraqi soldiers that have progressed that far. If you show them the ropes and get them familiar with the battle space, they will be a great asset." "I don't know," the SEAL platoon commander replied. "I'm worried these guys will be better than us and take over our mission. Maybe I should just let them fit in the room," he said. I quickly realized what was going on. As good as this platoon commander was, his ego was being threatened. In an environment like Vermont, trying to figure things out for yourself could easily get you killed. This was no place for ego. "No, don't even think about that. Listen, the enemy is outside the wire," I told my SEAL platoon commander bluntly. Our enemies were the insurgents lurking in the city of Vermont, not the coalition forces inside the wire on U.S. bases with us. We had to the same boat for the insurgency. We couldn't let them get hit. This new advisory unit, these are Americans and good Iraqis, possibly the best Iraqis. You do whatever you can to help these guys. If they outperform your team and take your mission, good. We'll find you another one. Our mission is to defeat this insurgency. We can't let our egos take precedence over doing what is best to accomplish it." "Got it, boss," said the platoon commander. A smart and humble warrior, he quickly recognized his viewpoint was wrong and changed his attitude. It was immaterial which units did what or who conducted the most operations. It was about the mission and how we could best accomplish it and win. The platoon commander and his element of SEALs had been bravely fighting hard. They had been in dozens of firefights in the few weeks they had been at Camp Corregidor and could use all the help they could get from another capable unit. While the SEAL platoon commander quickly put his ego in check, unfortunately, there were other egos getting in the way. As the new unit began to interact with the SEALs and first the 506th personnel, some of their attitudes raised eyebrows. A few of them did not carry themselves with the same humility as the band of brothers, first of the 506 soldiers, and our SEALs did on Camp Corregidor. A handful of the troops in the new unit flaunted an undisciplined appearance. Some had mustaches and goatees with long hair. They wore dirty baseball caps and cut-off t-shirts with mismatched uniforms. Now, some military units on remote, isolated bases might change their grooming standards in order to fit in with the local populace or with the foreign military units they are with. In some cases, such an appearance might even be required. But here in Vermont, in close proximity with conventional forces, on bases only operated by the Army and Marine Corps, this was bound to cause friction. In the minds of some of the members of this new unit, they were above conforming to the colonel's strict grooming policies. But that alone was an issue that could be overcome. After all, a clean uniform does not a good soldier make. But the problems didn't stop there. Some of the unit's U.S. advisors did not address the 1st of the 506 soldiers with professionalism and respect. They talked down not only to ranked soldiers, but also to senior leaders. Considering virtually every rifleman in the 1st of the 506 had more combat experience than most of the men in this unit ever would, this was especially shocking. To make matters worse, the new unit was little of listening to advice or learning from the SEAL platoon commander and his men. After weeks of sustained combat operations in one of the worst sectors of Vermont, our SEALs had lessons learned that saved lives. From specific gear needed, to how much ammunition to carry, to the amount of water needed for missions, to effective tactics and communications plans, the SEAls have learned a great deal about conducting operations with the 1st of the 506 in this specific area. When they attempted to pass this valuable information on to the new unit, their advice was shunned. Overconfidence was risky in such a hostile environment, a mistake most often made by warriors who had never truly been tested. Because of the thousands of well-armed insurgents and extreme violence that engulfed Vermont, every U.S. unit had to carefully coordinate plans and be ready to support each other. Here, the constant threat from large-scale attack, the potential to overwhelm and annihilate a small group of U.S. troops was very real. That meant everyone had to share operational details of plans as much as they could in order to ensure synchronized efforts. From large battalion-sized operations to simple logistics convoys, it was essential to coordinate and keep other units informed in order to give everyone the greatest chance of survival and prevent fratricide. Yet, when planning their missions, this new unit working the 1st of the 506 battle space refused to disclose their plans, locations, timelines, or other operational details. They didn't think they needed to inform the colonel of their plans. This meant they intended to go out into the colonel's battle space, among his units, rely on his support when things went sideways, and conduct operations without fully coordinating. When the 1st of the 506th Battalion Operations Officer confronted them and asked for a plan detailing their first mission, the new unit's leader told them, "We'll tell you later on a need-to-know basis." When the 1st of the 506th Tactical Operations Center, or TOC, inquired about the unit's specific plan location for a mission, a standard practice to prevent friendly units operating in the area from accidentally engaging them, and enabling the 1st of the 506 TOC to send help to the location they need it. The unit's leader provided a 4-digit grid from the military system. That the unit's troops could be located anywhere within a 1,000-meter grid square, all but worthless to the 1st of the 506 TOC. Earlier, we had learned some tough lessons in information sharing, and lack thereof, that had resulted in fratricide. In such a dangerous operating environment, with large numbers of well-armed enemy fighters, and multiple friendly units maneuvering in the same battle space, such a lack of coordination could well mean a death sentence. The SEAL platoon commander soon reported back to me on the friction between the new unit and the 1st of the 506th soldiers. My advice was simple: give them what they need and try to help them if you can, but it sounds like they will make their own bed. Unfortunately, the platoon commander was not able to help, and the situation did not improve. In less than 2 weeks, the colonel directed the unit to leave Camp Corregidor. With such impressive operational capability, they should have been a big contributor to the fight. But the colonel and his troops simply could not risk working with a group where some members' egos prevented them from ever fully integrating with the 1st of the 506th Battalion. As a result, the unit had to watch the historic Battle of Ramadi from afar, as Delta Platoon SEALs and 1st of the 506 soldiers took the fight to the enemy in the Moab, killing scores of insurgents and helping to accomplish the strategic objectives of securing and stabilizing the city. Principle: ego clouds and disrupts everything. The planning process, the ability to take good advice, and the ability to
He and his soldiers were exceptional warriors. Our team had tremendous respect and admiration for their courage and fighting spirit as they fought every day in the constant attack, in the heart of dangerous enemy territory. Our SEAL elements worked out of Falcon, and from there pushed even deeper into enemy territory. When we were ferociously attacked by insurgents, which was often, the company commander personally mounted up in his tank, guided his troops, and brought the thunder with main guns, Team Bulldogs, awarded to aid his tanks to bear on our behalf. He and his Bulldog soldiers were an outstanding group, eager to close with and destroy the enemy, and we loved them for it. On this particular coordinated search operation, our SEALs from Charlie Platoon and Task Unit Blue would provide sniper overwatch, while our SEAL combat advisors would manage a platoon of Iraqi soldiers participating in the clearance on the ground. Jocko teamed up with the Army Battalion's operations officer, who would help manage the clearance, while Jocko would provide command and control as well as coordination of our SEAL elements supporting the operation. In planning, we decided to set up two separate SEAL sniper overwatch positions, several hundred meters apart, to cover the U.S. Army and Iraqi coordinated search teams as they enter buildings block by block across the sector. The first SEAL sniper overwatch position, OP1, led by Charlie Platoon's assistant officer in charge, would take position in a large 4-story apartment building some 300 meters to the east of Mount Falcon to protect the northern flank of the coordinate search teams. I would be the second sniper overwatch position, OP2, of 8 SEALs and 7 Iraqi soldiers. We plan to take position about 1 kilometer southeast of Mount Falcon, along the southern flank of the coordinate search teams. The area was heavily ID'd. At 0200 local time, 2 o'clock in the morning, those of us in OP2 stepped off the foot patrol from Mount Falcon into the dark and dangerous Romani streets. Empty at this hour, all appear quiet, but in this neighborhood, enemy fighters could be waiting around every corner. The other SEAL Overwatch team, OP1, would be an hour later, since their position was very near the friendly combat outpost, and it was one they knew well, having utilized this position before. My team, OP2, had much farther to travel, and not having been in any of the buildings in the immediate area, we would need more time to establish a good position. On the patrol end, I served as patrol leader, positioned second from the front, just behind the roadman. We moved as quietly as possible on the streets, weapons trained at every angle, watching for enemy, ready for contact at all times. We took great care to avoid debris, such as trash piles in the street or other strange items, being deliberate in one step as the threat from IEDs was substantial. Each man carried a heavy load of weapons, ammunition, and water, in anticipation of what we knew would likely be a big and lengthy fight come daylight. This urban war zone was straight out of a Hollywood set for a World War II movie, like the ones we watched growing up. Walls littered with bullet holes, burned out cars in the street, rubble buildings, and bomb craters. It was surreal to be in a place filled with such violence and destruction. We continued our patrol down the dusty, trash-covered streets, weapons glistening in all directions. Our patrol snaked through alleyways, a rare operating street lamp, most had been shot out or didn't have electrical power, and maneuvered the best we could around packs of mangy street dogs whose barking could give away our position. We planned to utilize a 2-story house for an OP2 overwatch position and thought it would provide a good view to cover the coordinate search team's southern flank. After a 20-minute patrol without a we arrived at the location. Just outside the walled compound, the entire element took up security positions around the gate. With weapons covering, we boosted the cover of Iraqi soldiers over the wall. They quickly unbolted the gate from the inside and then let the rest of us in. SEAL shooters and Iraqi soldiers swiftly and quietly flew into the compound and moved toward the front door. Iraqi soldiers nodded and struck the defending inside to open up. A bewildered Iraqi man answered the door and complied. SEALs quickly cleared the compound, checking each room, a second-story balcony, the rooftop, and the interior corridor for threats. Once clear, we set security positions. We provided a decent view in one direction along the main road. In the other direction, however, it offered little except for an exposed balcony. It was difficult to place key security positions without exposing personnel to attack from surrounding buildings. Our OP2 snipers brought these significant concerns to me and our platoon's leading petty officer, or LPO, one of my most trusted leaders. We were in a bind. We could take the building next door and maintain a security contingent there, the LPO offered. It was a great idea, and we decided to pursue that option. Leaving the team in place, we sent a clearance team to the adjacent building, but what they found was not encouraging. The vantage point was no better. Positioning adequate security forces in 2 different buildings would spread us extremely thin, especially in such a dangerous neighborhood, crawling with heavily armed rouge. With this option not practical, I talked things over with my LPO. It was still dark, the sunrise was not far off, and the first call to prayer was soon echoed from the mosque minarets in Awaken City. Time was running out to get into position, especially as the coordinate search teams of Army soldiers, supervisor teams, and Iraqi soldiers were convinced their operation safe and were depending on our sniper overwatch team to cover them. No options are good, I admitted, but our least bad option is to pull everyone back to our original building and secure that position as best we can. The LPO agreed and immediately executed the plan. We knew the position had substantial vulnerabilities, but we would have to do all we could to mitigate such risk. Our SEAL snipers took positions to best protect the troops on the ground, and then we placed the rest of our team in positions to protect the snipers, one of whom was somewhat exposed on the balcony. With the position set, OP2's SEAL radioman made a call to our other SEAL sniper overwatch, OP1, reporting our position. We then checked in on Team Bulldog's net and passed our location to Jocko, who was with Team Bulldog at Mount Falcon, so he could coordinate with the other troops on the ground. After the first call to prayer, and the minaret loudspeakers rang throughout the city, signaling the dawning of the day. Soon, the first rays of light painted the eastern horizon, and South Central Monty began to awaken. Even in the Warm City, some semblance of normal life carried on. People emerged from their houses, cars and trucks backed out of driveways, and made their way down city streets. Shepherd boys drove their herds of sheep down the road to graze along the fertile banks of the Euphrates River. The sun rose with searing heat, which would crescendo midday to baking temperatures of over 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Over the radio, soldiers of Team Bulldog said their coordinate search operation was underway. Dozens of soldiers, including the SEAL advisor and Iraqi soldier Clinton's team, moved out from Mount Falcon, accompanied by armed firemen, Abrams tanks, and wrecking vehicles. Positioned hundreds of meters away, OP2 had a heavy grind of tank tracks on pavement and the rev of their powerful gas-driven engines. I checked in with Jocko via radio as he moved out with the coordinate search team. I was proceeding according to plan. It was such a nasty neighborhood, it didn't take long for enemy fighters to mount. The first attempts came OP2 could hear the report of big rifles as OP1's SEAL snipers hammered a couple of armed insurgents forward to attack. Soon, our OP2 snipers observed 3 enemy fighters with AK-47s and all these rocket, maneuvering through the streets, pressing the rooftops. SEAL snipers engaged, hitting 2 of the 3 incidents and running to cover. With these shots, the enemy had a good indication of where we were. Within the hour, the first burst of Bush machine gun fire snapped over the heads of the 2 SEALs positioned on the balcony. It was only the beginning, as the enemy sporadically engaged our building and We knew their attacks would go beyond the ball as they pinpointed our pit and gave the rest. The cold search operation proceeded sporadic gunfire and a few warning shots fired. The SEAL sniper overwatch positions were able to help thwart any major attacks before they could materialize. The vigilant Team Bulldog soldiers, with their tanks at the ready, were offered a substantial job. Within about 2 hours of sunrise, the Army soldiers, along with Jocko and a small team of SEAL combat advisors, who were Iraqi soldiers, cleared every building in the center. Having accomplished their mission, they got moved safely back to Top Falcon. It had been a relatively smooth operation, which in such a dangerous neighborhood, right in the heart of South Central Iraq, was somewhat miraculous. No American or Iraqi soldiers were wounded or killed. That was a testament to good planning and execution by the U.S. forces involved, and a tribute to the effectiveness of the SEAL sniper overwatch teams. With the coordinated search force back at Top Falcon, both SEAL overwatch teams, OP1 and OP2, had accomplished our objectives. Our standard operating procedure, SOP, dictated we remain in position until nightfall, and then patrol back to base under cover of darkness. We can more safely move through the dangerous streets. A small element patrolling in broad daylight through enemy territory presented serious risk of almost certain contact. Enemy machine guns, RPG-7, shoulder-fired rockets, and IEDs can be utilized at deadly effect. But for OP2, remaining in our current position also presented great risk. The building we held had substantial tactical vulnerabilities. The enemy knew where we were, and there was a high probability that with enough time, enemy fighters would mount a serious attack. Should they do so, we might very well take significant casualties and even find our position overrun by determined enemy fighters at close quarters. This presented quite a leadership dilemma. Again, I discussed options with my trusted LPA. We can stay where we are and wait until nightfall, or we can quickly break out of here and foot patrol back to Top Falcon. Or we can call in the Bradleys for extract, though that could take some time. Bradley fighting vehicles provided protection from small arms fire behind their armored plating. They brought significant firepower with a 25mm chain gun and 7.60mm coaxial machine gun. But they required some time to relieve troops and drive to our position. Bradleys were loud, and bad guys would hear them coming from some distance. This option would also expose the U.S. soldiers and crew vehicles to the substantial IED threat, as the roads in the vicinity of our position were extremely dangerous and not swift on the IED platforms. This could very well result in an IED strike, a deadly explosive buried in the road, and kill or seriously wound the soldiers inside. Were this to happen, it would require sending even more vehicles and troops in harm's way to extract casualties and their vehicles. Calling in the Bradleys was waiting for perhaps another half hour, and the 13 Bulldog soldiers in significant danger. They were also in danger of us riding the vehicles through heavily IED streets. If we stayed in position until dark in accordance with SOP, we would almost certainly have to fend off increasingly violent enemy attacks for another 8 to 10 hours. Should those attacks exploit the significant weaknesses of our defenses, we might be let down and unable to depart without calling for fire support and putting more forces at greater risk to bail us out. If we pulled out on foot immediately and quickly patrolled back to Top Falcon, we would probably get shot at. We would likely do a hasty attack, but we didn't have enough time to coordinate for maximum effectiveness. We can help mitigate that risk by moving quickly and utilizing misdirection in the streets and alleyways and predicting our exact route back to Top Falcon so they couldn't set it. Still, any gunfire we received, no matter how hasty, could certainly kill or horribly wound any of us. No options were good options. We had to choose the least bad option. So what are we doing, L2? That's the LPA. Time is ticking. I had to make a call. We're pulling out inside. It was.
Oh, oops. I forgot the rest. Oops. Oh. Time for part 2. Tabs push-ups. Tabs let's go and do that then. Sorry. Okay. Two. Three. Cheers, everyone. All done. Time to do some stretches. Thanks for watching if you did. 1 hour 46. Cool. Cheers, everyone. Bye.